All right, this morning, apologize for my voice a bit. I was out in the smoke and some other things that probably all worked together. It made it just a little rough. I told Marie I was going to blame her because she had us go to this thing the other day when it was a little rough. But I got some water here and I'll be fine. It's just one of those things. Now this morning, I'm going to teach on a topic that I know, but I've never taught on before. For a lot of reasons. The topic that I'm going to teach on this morning is the topic of fasting. Now, the reason I've never taught on fasting, even though I've done it, is because I've always thought of fasting as something that's kind of personal. And I've always remembered a verse that talks about fasting and how when you do it, you shouldn't even look like you're fasting. It should be, to everybody on the outside, it should appear that you're not doing anything outside of the norm, right? But I mean, since I was in my 20s, I fasted. And then I went a period of time where I didn't. Before I got married, let's just say, I was very much, I heard about it. I heard a preacher preach a message on it and give a lesson. And I thought, I've never heard anybody do anything on this topic before. And I was like 23 or something. So as a 23-year-old, I'm thinking, hey, I want to start fasting. And so I just started doing it. Eventually I got a book that somebody sent me called God's Chosen Fast that I looked at that gave me some information. But I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought, well, how can it get any easier? Fasting is just don't eat. I thought at that time, that's all you have to do is just don't eat. So I'm thinking, okay, I mean, what more do you have to know? And I learned a lot over time. And just so that you understand what I can speak to and what I might not be able to speak to, when I was single, I probably fasted pretty regularly. The longest fast I ever did was a 5-day fast. I never went beyond 5 days, and I'll explain why. And because I was single and I could do everything according to my own plan, it was easy to not have things pop up that would make it difficult. And I didn't really have to consider anybody around me because I was single. So that's my experience. I can talk to those things. But what we're going to look at is what the Bible has to say about it. And then I'll sprinkle in a few things that I learned, because over time I learned fasting is not just not eating. A person can fast, and you can do it in a way where if you have a medical limitation or, a concern, if you're older, like I'm much older now, that you cannot push your body so hard. Because there are a lot of fasts in the Bible. We're going to look at all of them. So my introductory verse, I'm going to read you out of Ezra, chapter 8, and verse 21. 21 through 23. Ezra 8, 21 through 23. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river of Ahava, that we might afflict ourselves before our God to seek of him a right way for us, and for our little ones, and for all our substance. For I was ashamed to require of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy in the way, because we had spoken unto the king, saying, the hand of our God is upon all them for good that seek him, but his power and his wrath is against all them that forsake him. So we fasted and besought our God for this, and he was entreated for us. So fasting, all it is it's affliction. That's what fasting is. A good definition of fasting, other than the kind we're going to look into, is it's a way to afflict yourself. Right? It's a way for you to deny the flesh and afflict yourself so that you can show God that when you're praying about something, that you are really seeking his attention. And that's going to become important when we look at some things in a little bit here. One of the best examples, it's actually an illustration I've heard many times, but I've never really used in preaching myself. Maybe because I've heard it so much, I didn't figure it was something I should repeat because it was said out there enough. But we've all heard the stories about if you have two dogs that are going to fight, the dog you feed is the one who's probably going to come out on top, right? So when you're feeding the natural physical man, and you're not feeding the spiritual man, then the natural physical man is likely going to come out on top in a fight. And fasting is literally not feeding the natural man and instead feeding the spiritual, because when you see fasting, it's always fasting and prayer or fasting and worship. So that's an important distinction to remember. Now, I will say this. I would recommend, and this is from my experience, I've done the fasting. When I started fasting, I did it all because a guy preached on it, because I looked some things up in the Bible on it, and so I was trying to do biblical fasting. But I've also done the other kind of fasting, the kind that you do because you want to, get healthier or deal with something that you might be experiencing. And I have to tell you, to me, the non-scriptural fasting doesn't work so well. It's my opinion. Now, I know lots of people fast and don't have it. It's not connected with worship or prayer or anything like that. There are whole groups of people you can join that'll fast with you, and they will give you these rules, and they'll say scientifically the best time to start your fast is here and then end it here, and your target should be for duration about this much time. And you can get lots of information now about fasting that wasn't available when I was 23 years old. Maybe it was out there, but you probably needed a book. Now there's apps on your phone. There's groups you can join online that'll talk about that. There's all kinds of data out there. But I don't recommend the fasting for health for a couple reasons. Number one is when I started dabbling in the fasting for health was when I started getting away from fasting for God. And I realized that my goals in the fasting started changing, and I realized that the way I did it started changing. And I just didn't, at some point it didn't feel the same when I was fasting. And then I ran into challenges, and because it was just for health, I didn't have a reason to overcome those challenges, so I ended up giving up on it. When I did it for God, when I fasted for God to honor God, it's different. And we're going to look at some of those things. So, which dog are we going to feed? The Bible says in Ephesians 5:29, "For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church." So when we fast, we're not feeding or nurturing the physical man. We're doing something that is causing the physical man to be afflicted at the expense of the spiritual man, who's getting all the attention. Now, Jesus mentions fasting in Matthew 9:14 through 15. Matthew 9:14 through 15. "Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, Why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not? And Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast." So, like with anything, fasting, one of the dangers in it is that it becomes very pharisaical, I guess. Is that a word? It could be a word, right? Because the Jews had all kinds of rules about fasting. Certain days when you had to do it, and they had certain requirements if you were going to participate in that. And I'm going to touch on a few of those. And they turned it into a thing where people used to do it to get God's attention of their own free will into something where people did it because they had to, because there was pressure, right? And so we're going to look a little bit at that too. But we see Jesus says here, it says, "When the bridegroom shall be taken from them, then shall they fast." Not they might fast, but he says then they shall. So it was something that Jesus very much knew about. He and his disciples weren't practicing it while they were together, but after he left, there are many instances where they did. So why? Why fast? I mean, this is probably one of the best sections of Scripture. If you want to look at something about fasting, go to Isaiah chapter 58. Isaiah chapter 58, verses 1 through 9. We're going to look at some things in there. Isaiah 58, 1 through 9. It says, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily, and to delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinances of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice, they take delight in approaching to God. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors. Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high." So one reason that you fast correctly is to make your voice heard on high. Now it's also up above, we saw where he talked about a fast. He goes, you weren't fasting to me when you did these other things, but we're going to find the reasons why a person should fast. So one, to make your voice to be heard on high. Verse 4. Continuing in verse 5. "Is it such a fast that I have chosen? A day for man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast, and an acceptable day to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I have chosen?" Now here are some reasons why God chooses for us to utilize fasting. So we already know to make our voice be heard on high, to loose the bands of wickedness. So if you're going through a struggle and you're having a hard time with it, you can fast to loose those bands of wickedness. Maybe it's in your family. Maybe it's in your church. Maybe it's in your city or your nation. To undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke. So when things are difficult, fasting is something that a Christian and people in the Old Testament could turn to. "Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh? Then," now here's a benefit of fasting they talk about in here, "then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee, the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. Then thou shalt call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity." So it's hard to look at fasting and not look at prayer with it, and not look at worship with it. That's a very important part. Because if you just fast and you're not praying to God, all you're doing is afflicting your soul and stuff like that, and it's not getting you closer to it. Because you can get close to God without fasting. You don't have to fast to be heard of God. You don't have to. Fasting is just a way when something's going on and you're looking for maybe a little extra help, a little extra attention, that you've got a method to get God's attention to do this. Now notice one of the things that's set up here. I forgot this was in there. I actually mentioned it later. But in verse 3, it says, "Wherefore have ye fasted?" When he was talking to them about their incorrect ways of doing it, say they, "and thou seest not. Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge." So they're saying, our fasts aren't working. We're doing it, God, but you're not hearing us. It says, "Behold," this is God answering back, "in the day of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors." So there's a difference between isolating a fast and saying, I'm not going to eat anything, but you do everything else that's worldly and brings you physical pleasure while you're doing that. Is that fasting? If fasting is afflicting yourself, then that's a time when you're denying the things that your body wants, right? And one of the things I that I have sprinkled in there somewhere later, but I want to connect it with this verse because it's better that it's with the verse, is when you decide to do a fast, don't look for things to make it easier. I'm not telling you make it harder, but I'm saying don't look for things to overcome. It's interesting, when I read a lot of books about it and stuff like that, even when I read some Jewish literature on fasting, they would talk about, this fast is coming up. So they say, make a big meal before you do the fast. So if you're going to fast from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m., let's just say, a 24-hour, right? That they would eat a big meal till like 5:59, and then they'd stop eating. And then they'd go from 6 till 6 the next day, and they'd eat at 6:01, right? Now, I suppose you could do that. Technically, is that a fast? Yes, it is. It is a fast. But you're seeking to get around it, just in your planning. So it's not really about afflicting yourself when you do that. It's about, oh man, I got a fast coming up. How am I going to get through this fast? Well, I know. I'll have all my favorite things. I'm going to have Oreo cookies and ice cream, man, till 5:59. And then at 6 o'clock I'm fasting, and then the M&Ms are in the bowl waiting for 6:01 the next day. That's not fasting, right? But at the same time, I don't want people getting hung up on the legality of it and saying, well, but you went 24 hours. That's true. I'm saying a lot of it has to do with the motive, right? It's why you're doing it and how you're doing it, the motive. Just like with anything else, as a Christian we know. So if your motive is that your heart's not really in it, you really don't want to fast, then don't fast. Just don't do it. Because you're not going to get the same benefit as when you go into it and say, God, my heart is broken about this. And so I'm going to fast to you, and we're going to get to something else in a little bit. And so your fast is God. And you're not thinking about what you're going to do before you start fasting. Maybe you're just going to decide, I'm going to start fasting right now. And you're not thinking about what you're going to do after you're fasting, because you're doing it because you're trying to do it the right way for the right reason, and you're just hoping that you can get some attention from God, which is a different kind of a thing. People fast for big decisions and efforts. In Acts 13, verses 1, now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger. I'm never sure how to pronounce that. Is Niger the correct way? I think it is. But on that one I'm not sure. And Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. As they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Ghost said, separate me Barnabas and Saul for the work whereunto I have called them. So they were trying to decide who they were going to have do the work. And what they did was they prayed and they fasted. And we're about to make a big decision here, and we want to go the way that God would have us to go. So we're going to fast and pray about it and see what God shows us. And so they did, and they made a big decision. And when they had fasted and prayed and laid their hands upon them, they sent them away. So I heard somebody say one time when he was teaching on or preaching on fasting rather, he goes, in the Baptist church, we're about feasting and fellowship. And he goes, if you go look in the New Testament, they were about fasting and prayer. So a lot of times, we'll maybe send a missionary out. Now, we've never sent one from our church, but in some churches, they'll send a missionary out. And what do? They have a big potluck, and everybody gets together, and they kind of wish him off well as he heads off to Papua New Guinea or wherever he's going, kind of a thing. In the New Testament church, they would have fasted and prayed. They would have looked at this as, this is a serious thing. We're sending him out because we're wanting him to win souls. And so they would fast and pray as they sent him out. It was just a little different. Acts 14 and verse 23. Acts 14:23. And when they had ordained them elders in every church, and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord on whom they believed. So again, part of a big decision, part of a big change, a big effort. So let's talk about the different kinds of fasts, because there are a bunch of fasts you can do. First one I want to talk about is the only one that I've ever done. It's called a normal fast. All right? A normal fast is where you don't have any food and you pretty much drink water, and that's it. Now, if you take medication, yeah, you take your medication, right? But I didn't take vitamins. I didn't take any kind of supplements. I didn't do anything like that when I did a normal fast, because it's pretty much a water-only fast, is what it's supposed to be. Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. A section we know. You probably don't even need to turn there. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. Now I want you to notice it said that after 40 days and 40 nights, which is a very long fast, he was an hungered. He wasn't athirst. He was an hungered. So he was drinking water, but he wasn't eating. All right? Now, a 40-day fast shows up in the Bible in a lot of places. It's very much a almost supernatural thing to do. And in Moses' case, where he not only didn't eat, but he didn't drink anything for 40 days, you literally cannot survive that without God. But he was in the presence of God the whole time, we're going to see. So a 40-day fast is significant. I was never moved to attempt that, personally. Like I said, I did a 5-day fast for one reason, because I understood that after 2 or 3 days, you don't feel hungry anymore. And I wondered if that was true. So I decided I'm going to fast and I'm going to go for a while. Now, I was working, I was young, I was doing everything that I was normally doing. I didn't change anything at all. And so I did it. It was true. After about 3 days, I stopped being hungry. First couple days, 3 days, I was hungry. It was affliction for me not to eat something. But after I got to about the 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, I wasn't hungry anymore. It was easy to keep going. Now, I'm going to talk about some things you need to be careful. So I don't want people listening to me and thinking, oh, well then why don't I do like a week-long fast? And there's some things that I want to talk about before we get to that. But a normal fast is the absence of food, but you're intaking water. That's a normal fast. Then there's an absolute fast. Acts chapter 9 and verse 1. I'm going to start with the New Testament. And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. And Saul arose from the earth, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no man, but they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was there, and he was 3 days without sight, and neither did eat nor drink. So Saul did an absolute fast for 3 days. Now, that's a thing. It's one thing to go 3 days without food. It's a whole different thing to go 3 days without water. And keep in mind where they lived. It was in the desert. So, I know physically the body can probably make 3 days. I would not advise anybody pursue a fast like that unless you have some kind of critical emergency. And even at that, it's really risky. Please take my word for it when I say this. Fasting is not something that should be entered into lightly. You can get yourself hurt really bad. You can be driving down the road after not having eaten for a day and a half, 2-3 days, and you can pass out and you can crash your vehicle. and hurt somebody or hurt yourself. That can happen. A person can do pretty well, I mean, if they're healthy and there are no physical problems, can do 24 hours, right? Most people can. Now, not everybody, but most people can. But once you go past that 24-hour mark, you're going into some dangerous territory. So a person has to be careful. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So Saul did this 3-day fast, no food and no drink. That was a pretty significant thing, but we saw that God did some things with Saul after that. Another verse, going to the Old Testament, Ezra chapter 10, verse 1. Now when Ezra had prayed, and when he had confessed, weeping and casting himself down before the house of God, there assembled unto him out of Israel a very great congregation of men and women and children, for the people wept very sore. And Shechaniah the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam, answered and said unto Ezra, We have trespassed against our God, and have taken strange wives of the people of the land. Yet now there is hope in Israel concerning this thing. Now therefore let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and such as are born of them, according to the counsel of my Lord, and of those that trembled at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. Arise, for this matter belongeth unto thee. We also will be with thee. Be of good courage, and do it. Then arose Ezra, and made the chief priests, the Levites, and all Israel to swear that they should do according to his word, and they swear. And Ezra rose up from before the house of God, and went into the chamber of Jehonan, the son of Eliashib. And when he came thither, he did eat no bread, nor drink water. For he mourned because of the transgression of them that have been carried away. So, big decision, big effort going on. He did it as a way to get God's attention. So that's an important one. I'll give you another one. This one you guys probably remember. Esther. We remember the story of Esther. They were going to kill, all the Jewish people because of somebody around the king. But in Esther 4:14 it says, For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This was being spoken to Esther. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So this one, literally lives were at stake. And this one was, I'm going to fast, my maidens are going to fast, I need all you guys to fast with me, because everybody's life was at stake. Now that's a very unusual circumstance, right? Not a normal one. Now I will tell you, if you go and read through the Jewish teachings, because I looked through some of it on fasting, I wanted to know, there are a lot of Jewish fasts right now according to their traditions, where they say for 24 hours you don't eat, you don't drink. That is in there. Try it sometime. See how it feels. I mean, I'm not telling you to do a 24-hour no water, no food fast, but I'm just saying sometimes you wake up in the morning and your throat is like, and you're trying to generate saliva and loosen things up because it's been really dry, like it would be in the desert, and you've been breathing in that dry air all night and stuff like that. It is no joke. It's serious. Again, it's serious. So, I mean, it's not a little thing. I'm going to give you some other references, but I'm not going to read them all. Deuteronomy 9:9, another example of an absolute fast. Deuteronomy 9:18. Exodus 34:27 through 28. 1 Kings 19:8. Keep in mind, the key points of this fast are no food, no water, and this can be dangerous. So please keep that in mind. Then there's a partial fast. Now, a partial fast is another one that people probably remember. You may not know it by the name partial fast, but Daniel. So when Daniel was, before the king and stuff, they were going to feed him, the king's meat. They were trying to nourish him up and then determine which ones were of such that were a benefit to the king, that had just taken them out of Israel. And he didn't want to eat the king's meat, so he asked if he could eat the pulse instead. So he didn't forego food. He just limited his food intake to avoid the king's meat and the delicacies, and basically ate this vegetable pulse, I think is how it's described. Now, pulse isn't something that I'm familiar with, but in reading about it, it's kind of like, I think there's actually something called a Daniel diet out there, but it's kind of a vegetable mash or something that he ate, and they had water. They weren't doing wine or anything like that. Now, that's a partial fast, but it was still a fast. Look what Daniel accomplished. I mean, he had things revealed to him that he revealed to the king, and he was able to get to the point to where by the end of his life, Israel was back becoming a nation again with the blessing of one of the kings that he was under. So he accomplished quite a bit. I don't want you thinking that a person has to go and not eat any food, especially not drink any water, just to get God's attention. That's not true. Because if you're afflicting yourself, no matter how you do it, God recognizes it. And some people cannot fast. Some people should not fast. So people who cannot, shouldn't do it. And you shouldn't feel like, well, God's not going to listen to me like he would maybe this other Christian, like maybe I was at 23, when not eating for 5 days is something I could do because I didn't have a wife. I was young. I was in the prime of my life to a certain extent. Back in those days, I would fast and I'd go play tennis that afternoon. But that was after I did it for a while. It wasn't something I did right off the bat. But I was also, the other thing I want to say is, when I ate back then, I was taking vitamins, I was eating super healthy foods, because I knew I was going to do another fast, and I didn't want to damage myself. So I'm saying, don't compare yourself to another person. For some people, I've heard people say that they've afflicted themselves. They say, I have a real problem with sugar. So I'm going to fast all sugar for like 3 days. I'm not going to have anything with any sugar. No sugar drinks, no sugar foods, none of that stuff. And I'm going to eat, food because I'm going to take care of myself, but I'm going to avoid sugar. That can be affliction of your soul. That can be a fast that God can honor, especially if that's what you can do. You know what I mean? Or somebody say, I'm just going to eat, a very simple thing, the Daniel situation. You could do that too, and God will honor that. I don't want anybody thinking that you have to do these special things or that this is a requirement or this is something. But it is something that I will say that can help you. It's something that can help you, because as soon as you start for God not doing something and replace it with Bible reading and prayer and worship, and you're putting your flesh down and doing those things to build your relationship with God, he's going to take notice and things are going to happen. All right, so let's talk. I'm going to run through some quick things on proper fasting. All fasting should be entered into prayerfully, and it should be ended the same way. Don't just go off the cuff and just decide you're going to do a fast. Don't let somebody talk you into doing a fast. Now, if somebody is a close brother or sister, and if they say, will you fast with me? And you go say, let me pray about it, and you go into it prayerfully, and you feel led to do that, then okay. But there's a concern about it becoming a legalistic requirement. So go into it prayerfully. And whatever you do, don't make an oath or a promise to God. Don't say, God, I'm not going to eat any food for 3 days. Don't do that, please. Matthew 5:33 says, again, ye have heard that it is said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all. This is Jesus speaking. Neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black, but let your communication be yea, yea, or nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. So don't go and make some big grand promise. You don't know what's going to happen. I'm telling you from personal experience, problems will come up when you start doing this. If you start fasting, the devil's not going to like it. All right? And all of a sudden, you're going to say, oh, I'm not going to eat till, I'm not going to eat today. And I'm going to go till tomorrow night until I eat maybe. And then that's the night you'll get the phone call. Someone will invite you over. Oh, your uncle's in from out of town and the whole family's getting together, right? Those kind of things happen. Or, you tell yourself, I don't know. You just have to be careful about these kind of things. Don't forget that what you're doing is afflicting yourselves. You can afflict yourselves a lot of ways. I'll tell you one. We've seen these kids nowadays with their phones. I'll give you a fast for a millennial. Don't use your phone for 3 days other than taking a phone call. Don't be there scrolling through Instagram and watching YouTube videos. There's a fast. And take the time that you would have normally spent doing that and read your Bible. That's a fast, right? That has nothing to do with food, but that's a fast. So that's one. Put the phone down. Go off social media. Quit watching the news. Whatever it is that can afflict you is a way for you to get God's attention. I recommend you keep a journal so you can track what you're praying about when you're fasting, what you're seeking, and what happens. Because every time you fast does not mean that you're going to get what you pray about. All right? Now, when I first started praying fasting and praying in my 20s, I had a couple of objectives. One was I wanted to know about this and I wanted to do it. Number two, I was living in Kalispell. I wanted to be married. I didn't have any prospects. I didn't know what I was going to do, and so I prayed God would help me find a wife. And so I fasted and prayed about it for months. Not months of not eating, but through months, I fasted and prayed multiple times about it. And I ended up meeting somebody, my wife, my current wife. I met her at a revival meeting. And I believe, honestly, I 100% believe that one of the reasons that I ended up married was because I fasted and prayed about it. Now, I've also fasted and prayed about things that I wanted that didn't happen. Because fasting and prayer isn't a guarantee that whatever you pray for is going to happen. It's just a guarantee that you're going to get God's attention. He's going to hear your request. So keep that in mind. Not everyone, I'm going to repeat this again because this is important. Not everyone can do a normal fast. And even more would be unable to do an absolute fast. Here's a tip. Don't weigh yourself. Don't weigh yourself. If you fast, you're going to lose weight. I was at my lowest weight ever when I was fasting regularly. I was 33-inch waist, 165 pounds, 63 maybe. I was really thin. And I was healthy because, again, I was vitamins and all that stuff. But please don't do it to lose weight. It's my recommendation. It'll happen anyway. You don't have to do it to lose weight. As a matter of fact, in prepping for this, when I was restudying, I did some fasting through the week, and I never weighed myself. I have no idea what happened. Don't care. Because when I used to fast as a younger, and when you see it in the Bible, I wasn't doing it for any reason other than to get God's attention and pray about some things. And if I weigh, I know myself, if I weigh myself, then it'll start being like, oh, wow, I lost 3 pounds. I lost 2 pounds. And now it's not going to be about getting close to God anymore. It's going to be about, hey, maybe I can lose some weight doing this. Just trust me, you'll lose weight. You don't need to know. As a matter of fact, when I first started doing it, I would never weighed myself then. I only realized that I was losing weight because it was like, man, these pants are loose. I maybe better get a new pair of pants. And I ended up getting some stuff. And then I weighed myself for the first time and thought, holy cow, I lost 30 pounds. Kind of a thing. But like I say, don't do it for that reason. Don't Don't give up the spiritual benefits for the physical. That's why you don't want to weigh yourself. Start off slow and set really reasonable targets. Young people hear stuff like this, like I did, and they just jump in, full bore. I'm going to go 3 days without eating. Don't do that. If you're going to do it, be reasonable. It's hard. You're going to feel like garbage. I've done it many times. If you don't fast frequently, when you fast oft, you don't feel as bad when you're fasting. But man, I'm telling you what, if you go fast now, and if you're a coffee drinker or something, you are going to feel terrible. You're going to feel awful, and it's going to make you want to quit. That's normal. Don't worry about that. But just know, don't try to do too much. God will honor it. I mean, God will honor. There are some fasts in the Bible where they just didn't eat during the day and they ate that evening, right? It doesn't have to be 24 hours. It doesn't have to be. But whatever you do, do it for the Lord and do it for the right reason. Fast of longer than 24 hours needs support. I would not recommend you do a fast exceeding 24 hours without somebody there to help you, because you really shouldn't be driving a vehicle if you're going to go more than 24 hours. Now, I did, but I was a dumb 20-year-old kid, right? I went like 3 days, and I was still driving and everything like that. Please don't do that. Don't do that. It's dangerous. You can pass out. You could cause an accident. You can hurt people. If you go longer than 24 hours, you're going to need to be careful about how you start eating again, because you don't just go and grab a cheeseburger after 3 days. You especially don't go and do that after 5 days. You'll make yourself sick, and you'll cause yourself a lot of problems. You have to be super careful. The longer you go, the longer it takes for you to break it and go back to a normal way of being. And then finally, I'm going to wrap it up with this. Nobody should know, except for your wife. Now, you got to tell your wife, you got to tell your kids, but don't tell anybody else. Nobody should even know you're doing it. If you're gonna go to the effort to fast, do it where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And I've got a bunch more verses I can give folks on this, but do it and then just keep it to yourself. And that's the proper way to do it. Because if you get attention from it, or if you get some kind of a benefit like, oh, he's so spiritually fasts, Jesus says, well, that person got his reward. So don't. Keep it to yourself if you're going to do that kind of thing. Nobody should even know. All right, I'm going to end it there. I've got a lot of other verses I could go on. But again, it's just something to look at. If you want more information, come and find me. I'll provide that information to you about it. But it's something that is within everybody's reach. And remember, it's not always food. Sometimes it can be things that have a hold on you. And you'll find out how much things have a hold on you when you give it up for 3 days or a day or something like that. All right, we'll take a break and we'll get started with a morning message in about 10 minutes. So, thank you. Amen.